President Cyril Ramaphosa has asked world leaders at the COP28 meeting in Paris on Friday to do more for vulnerable countries that are most affected by the climate issue. Over 100 nations and oil companies participating in the UN climate talks committed to making significant strides in combating global warming by 2030. A report by the Presidential Climate Commission found that in order to meet its emissions reduction targets, South Africa would need more than double its climate financing. The Commission's Head of Communications, Blessing Manale, joins us now to discuss this further. Thank you very much, sir, for your time and your patience with us this afternoon. Perhaps let's take a look at that Paris Climate Agreement. How is South Africa faring in terms of the commitments that we have made to cut emissions by 2030? Where are we?
Well, let me start by saying about a week ago, and good morning and good morning to the viewers, and indeed I understand why you're a bit later. South Africa has remained committed to meeting the targets, and that is communicated through what we call the NDC, the Nationally Determined Contributions. But to be able to meet those targets, you need to start making certain emission cuts in certain sectors. And you could hear about a week or two ago, there was issues about whether certain companies, including Eskom, were trying to move those targets. And we have said that we've got to stick to those targets. What we are missing is the money to meet those targets. We basically are sitting with, we need like 5 times more. We need about 4 billion by 2030, as 4 billion rand by 2030 to just meet the 3-year targets. And we are currently generating about 131 million in climate finance over the last 3 years. So you can imagine it's a paltry amount. And that's only from domestic sources. Foreign sources, they've been contributing about 6%, which is literally nothing.
Okay. So, sir, if I'm hearing you correctly, so far South Africa has got 131 million rand, and you need some 4 billion rand by 2030. Are those the correct numbers?
Yes. What I'm saying is that the PCC released what it calls Climate Finance Landscape Report last week on the eve of COP. And we actually discovered that climate finance over the last 3 years, 2019 to 2021, using that period, was only 131 million rand. But we actually need 4 billion rand by 2030. Okay. And if you've got to calculate that, it means that we've got to do that 5 times a year. So we've got to move from 131 to about 700 million a year.
Okay. Now, how do I put this? To get to where you need to get to in 2030, it was said that South Africa needs to decommission 8 coal-fired power plants, 6 by 2030 and the remaining by 2034, as power makes up half of South Africa's emissions. Before we get to the how, it is said that this year our country is the world's 11th biggest greenhouse gas emitter. How did we get to that conclusion?
Look, I mean, we calculate the actual emissions, and we are, because we are a very resource-intensive economy, energy-consumptive economy, and literally more than 80% of our current power is from coal-fired power stations, primarily in Mpumalanga, including nuclear and renewables that are really coming to stream. So we are indeed an intense. But we've got to clarify that there is no condition that says South Africa must decommission any power station earlier than its life. We've got to basically stop building any new coal-fired power. We've got to cut in certain in transport emissions, but the commitment is that under the current energy crisis, but also because of considerations for jobs and our competitive advantage, we can't cut that. The problem globally is if you don't cut beyond those targets, then you get slammed with taxes, basically carbon-based taxes on any production that comes from dirty fuels. That's the challenge.
What are the projections when it comes to the decommissioning of those coal-fired power plants? You speak of not decommissioning them before they've reached the end of their lifespan. What are the projections?
Well, I mean, the Commission does not determine that, but Eskom has basically made its own projections. And from the lessons of Komati, let me start by saying that out of the first decommissioned power station, Komati in in Mpumalanga, the commission made recommend that no other power stations must ever be decommissioned without due notice, without ample time. But from the current information is that in Mpumalanga you've got Krill, which is next, but it is literally in the next 6 years. So you're not going to see any new decommissioned power station in South Africa by 2029. But that also, secondly, that is if we stick to the hard deadline of the financials. And the science and the economics says if the crisis persists, we don't foresee a crisis for the next 8 years, you could probably be able to push the power station by 2 or 3 years maximum. But you start making a loss like Komati was when the country brought it back to life.
Mr. Manale, sir, how should we understand this, more so when you speak of South Africa needing 4 billion rand by 2030, which is around the corner, with or in conjunction with countries who are making pledges to South Africa to move away from certain products and to enter the renewable space, while they have backtracked? For instance, you've got Canada, which has also admitted it will miss its 2030 Paris targets. You've got the United Kingdom saying that in September they will delay the 2030 ban on new petrol car sales by 5 years. You've also got a number of countries that are actually going back to coal-fired power plants. And so how should we understand this call to move away from this space to enter the renewable space when the countries that are donating to South Africa to do so have backtracked on their commitments?
Well, indeed, you've asked so many questions, but let me quickly deal with a few of them. Most of that money is not donations, and that is the first drive. Most of that money is not grants, so it's either consensual loans or it's finances from the international financial banks like the World Bank or the Asian Development Bank or the BRICS Bank, what is called the NDB. So most of that money is not loans. It's not donations. What happened out of 2 years ago out of Paris, there was this pledge called the Just Energy Transition Partnership, which pledged the $8.5 billion. That calculates into about 148 billion rand to South Africa, and that's what gave birth to the Just Energy Transition Investment Plan, which the President gave over to UN Secretary General in COP28 recently. And that prioritizes electric vehicles, hydrogen, the recapitalization of ESCOM in terms of grid and infrastructure, as well as looking into renewables. And that is what South Africans have been saying. People are giving you money to accelerate, but they are not accelerating. There have been a number of variables. In terms of the use of coal in Europe, the story of the Ukrainian-Russian war. But also, then the second thing is that what we've always said is that if you slow down on your targets, you still have to meet the ultimate target. It means that if you delay now, you are going to have to exercise redoubled efforts towards 2030. So no country is expected to walk out of the Paris Agreement. It's just that people, the global community, have got to understand that they're going to have to accelerate one way or the other, and there's no going back. The SG said we are losing every minute.
So I do beg your pardon. I think a lot of us would agree that, yes, we need to do something about reducing our footprint. It is the how it is being done more so in South Africa. When you speak of the decommissioning of that plant in Mpumalanga, you've got people and families who are saying, because also it's so broad. There's one part, Mweli Masilela is in Mpumalanga for us, and he was talking to families who have been impacted in terms of the health cost, right, of these power stations. But then you've also got families who have lost jobs, who have lost food on the table. And so the how, are we explaining the how to South Africans? Are we being transparent with these monies to say, here is the budget or here is the breakdown, 5 rand will go towards this plaster or this patch? Is there transparency, do you perceive, on how we are doing this so that we understand that we are not working on anyone else's time, but we are working on South Africa's time, given the nuances of this here country?
Well, indeed. That's a very critical question. For us, it's just transparency. It is the just part of the transition. It is more than transparency. It's about inclusivity. It's about restoration. It's about procedural inclusivity. And we're saying that if workers are not included, they will not know that their jobs are coming to an end. The small entrepreneurs will not know that their markets are shrinking. So part of the work the Commission has been doing, particularly in Mpumalanga, has been, let us make sure that we are inclusive. Let us make sure that we start talking about reskilling workers. Let us start talking about alternative economic mechanisms. But let us also start saying, can communities not actually be part of owners of the energy economy? And we've just recently released a model called social ownership, where we're saying these women in Gwaguga, in Emalahleni, that continue to get seeds that cannot even plant, they don't even own the grid. Let them be the one that own the microgrid when Emalahleni goes solar. So we're doing that, but I think important is that we've got to co-create the solutions. And we're saying that Mpumalanga is the be-all and end-all. If we fail there, the whole country will fail. We will not succeed in the Northern Cape, we will not succeed in Gabeka, and when ultimately the power stations in Limpopo comes down 25 years down, we would repeat the same mistake. So it's a fair point. The communities have got to be included, but they've got to see alternative livelihoods. Mm-hmm. And Mpumalanga has got alternatives beyond coal, and we've got to be honest about it, without saying that we want to rush out of coal.
All right. That 4 billion rand, very quickly for us, repayment, some of those monies, are we going to be required to repay some of those monies? Who will be paying that money?
Well, indeed, there is, I mean, if we borrow, the state will underwrite. But as you recall, in February, when the Minister of Finance was outlaying the original budget, the mini budget, said that one of the conditions of giving Eskom more money is that it cannot go out and borrow. It must use that money for certain things, including, improving efficiencies. And South Africans, and generally our country, has been saying that some of these debts some are old, we have carried them on, but they are very burdensome. So there is a general discussion in the country about how much you can borrow, and when we borrow, how much can we be able to pay back. But the other element is that we don't need to always borrow. That's why, as the Commission and as South Africans and the developing world, we have said we are going to COP28 to call for the immediate implementation of the loss and damage fund. Because if you borrow to repair the damages of a flood that was caused by pollution by industrialized countries 20 years ago, you will never get out of underdevelopment. So that's why we welcome the establishment of a loss and damage fund. It's little. The pledges are 326 million for the whole world. So you can imagine. But it's the right step. So we need the money to come, not with conditions and not just loans, particularly for reparations, not only for future industrial development.
Thank you very much, sir, for your time this morning. Blessing Manale, Presidential Climate Commission Head of Communications.